In this episode of Biz Jet TV, we're going to be talking about flight safety and in particular runway excursions. And it's really, really important from a perspective for somebody that's looking to buy a private jet. I'd like to explain some of the technical aspects of the operation of aeroplanes here on the channel. Being an airline transport pilot myself, lots of experience flying around the world, both with the airlines and also private jets. It's important for owners to understand the flight safety aspect of the airplane. It's not just about the plane, it's about the pilots and how the plane is flown and how the pilots are trained. So this is one of the things we do here on Biz Jet TV, and I try to explain it in layman's terms so that somebody that's not a pilot or an engineer can understand what I'm trying to explain here. So welcome to Biz Jet TV. My name is Fabrizio Poli. As I said, I'm an airline transport pilot, but I'm also the author of the book, The Quantum Economy. You can get yourself a copy by clicking on the link below. This book is very interesting. It's tailored for entrepreneurs. It's all about the business of the future, the emerging markets, and how the private jet can get you in and out of these places quick and accelerate your business instead of in a linear fashion, in a quantum fashion. And in the book, there's the stories of a number of entrepreneurs that are using the private jet as a business tool. But anyway, let's get into what the NBAA published just recently about runway excursions in conjunction with the Flight Safety Foundation, where they analysed what's been going on with these runway excursions and put a system in place in order to prevent them from happening, which is really, really important. So there were 33 runway excursions in 2022, as you can see, 17 by the airlines and 16 by business aviation. We say, well, the airlines are worse than business aviation, but wait a minute, there were 31 million airline flights and a lot less private jet flights. So obviously there is a problem there. Now, what is a runway excursion? A runway excursion is when the airplane either goes off to the side of the runway or ends up going off the runway at the end. So basically when the airplane deviates off the runway for some reason. Now, one of the important things in understanding runway excursions, there are obviously two situations where a runway excursion can happen. One is on takeoff and one is on landing. So let's look at the takeoff situation first. Now, while the pilots have to compute some speeds for takeoff, one of the most important speeds they have to calculate is the V1 speed. And as you see here, the definition by the FAA of V1 is the maximum speed in the takeoff roll at which the pilot must take the first action. For example, applying brakes, reducing thrust, deploying speed brakes to stop the airplane within the accelerated stop distance, which enables the airplane to stop on the runway. So basically, the airplane is tearing down the runway. The pilot monitoring will shout out V1. At that point, when the airplane hits V1, the commitment is to go into the air. So if any failure happens, the airplane is taken into the air. Now, bear in mind that airplanes are designed to fly, so they're designed to be in the sky and not on the ground, so they actually perform better in the air than on the ground. Now, usually what happens, there's a low-speed rejected takeoff, and there's a high-speed rejected takeoff. On the Boeing 737, we have 80-knot call. If any lights appear in the cockpit, suddenly switch on below 80 knots, we just reject the takeoff. That's called a low-speed rejection or low-speed abort. Anywhere between 80 knots and V1, we will abort the takeoff for an engine fire, engine failure, or anything that enables the aircraft to not be controllable. In that case, we will stop the airplane between 80 knots and V1. Now, the V1 will vary according to the weight, the condition of the runway, the wind, etc. These are the factors that are calculated. So if you are at a high altitude airport in the summer or even in the winter when there's ice and that, the V1 needs to be calculated. So the pilots need time to calculate this V1 because it's very, very important. Now, I'll tell you a scary thing, and this is interesting. A friend of mine is an instructor in the Gulfstream G550 in the simulator. And he said to me, 80% of private jet pilots in the simulator, when they hit V1 and an engine failure happens or some malfunction of some sort, they try and stop the airplane on the runway. Now, if they're doing this in the simulator, they're going to do it on the airplane. And this is where a lot of the excursions happen. There is some sort of failure at V1, and the pilot thinks, well, maybe I've got enough runway, so I'll just stop on the runway instead of going into the air. And this is really, really dangerous to do that, because this is where you can go off the end of the runway. And sometimes people have died when this has happened. Now, what are the causes of these runway excursions? Now, that's one problem with takeoff. Now, let's go up in the air. Let's talk about when runway excursions happen when pilots are coming into land. Now, bear in mind, one would be too fast, okay? And 10% more airspeed equates to 20% more landing distance. The other thing would be a flare. If the airplane's flaring too high, a long flare can result in 30% more landing distance. So if you're fast and you're high, you add those two together, you're going to need more runway. And if you're coming into a runway at high altitude that's not too long, all these things add up, and you can end up on the end of the runway. And this could kill people. So that's one thing that has to be considered. So in order to prevent this from happening, the pilots need to plan well in advance, brief each other on what they're going to do. Now, weather can be a factor in this. Again, and the boss pushing to land in Aspen, even if the weather's bad, that can be very, very dangerous. So if you are the guy sitting in the back, please, when you get on the airplane, take your boss hat off and let the captain be the boss, because otherwise you're going to crash and die. And this has happened so many times, even to friends of mine that are no longer here now. The boss pushed them, they allowed the boss to push them, and they crashed and died. Now, as you can see here from this slide from the Flight Safety Foundation, there's a number of ways to reduce the risk of runway excursions. Now, go around not conducted, so you're coming in, and I've often talked about what a stabilized approach is. And if you're coming in instrument meteorological conditions where the weather's bad, basically at 1,000 feet, the airplane has to be completely configured for landing, and the checklist needs to be completed. And when you reach that 1,000 feet, if the aircraft isn't stable, so if it's doing stuff like this, or it's too fast or whatever, or the rate of descent's too quick, in that at 1,000 feet, the aircraft's not stable, you just go around. You come up, you go around again, and you try another attempt, or you decide to divert to an alternate aerodrome. And I've talked about this before here, about alternate aerodromes. It's always a good idea to plan 2 alternate aerodromes. One will be close by, and that's what's defined as a technical alternate. So if, for example, the runway shut at the destination airport because someone crashed or whatever, you would divert to technical alternate, which would be close by. In the case of London, for example, you would have Heathrow as your destination, Gatwick would be your technical alternate. New York, you could have Teterboro as your main destination, and your technical alternate could be White Plains, for example. So that's just to give you an idea of the difference. And then you would have a meteorological alternate, which will be further away from your destination, but not too far away, so that you can get there with your extra fuel, but it has to be further away so that the weather would be different. So if you're flying into a valley, let's say you're going into Heber Valley in Utah, which is in the mountains, and the weather suddenly is bad, a good meteorological alternate would be Salt Lake, because that's out of that valley into another valley, and the weather there will probably be different. Obviously, you've got to check the weather when you decide on the alternates and that, but those are important things. So the planning phase, as I always say, the 5 Ps, prior planning prevents poor performance. So the prior planning is really, really important. Now, touching down long is, as we said before, that can cause a runway excursion. Ineffective braking, and brakes do fail sometimes. That could cause a runway excursion. Landing gear malfunction, that does happen sometimes. Approaching fast, touchdown fast, or you touch down hard. That's another thing that can happen. The flight crew CRM, which is crew resource management, which is basically the communication between the two pilots, that needs to be good. The pilots need to have harmony between them, and they need to communicate. So before you touch a dial or do anything in the cockpit, if one guy says to the other guy, gear down, the other guy says gear down. So he says it first and then puts the gear down. So it's really, really important. Don't just go and touch switches and whatever without confirming verbally to the other person the message that they said to you. So if they said gear down, you repeat gear down, and then you put the gear down. These are important things that you learn when flying with the airlines. One of the airlines I flew for, we had 180 airplanes. We had to follow the standard operating procedures because every day you were flying with someone different. And often enough, this different person also was from a different country, so their mother tongue wasn't English. So it's even more important. So I know the importance of standard operating procedures. You really have to have that. Even if you're flying on your own, you have to have procedures and stick to them because they will keep you safe. Other things here, approaching high, pilot technique, attitude control, landing gear damage. I mean, there's lots of other reasons here why the runway excursion would happen. These are just listed here by the Flight Safety Foundation as they've analysed the number of accidents that have happened out there. So this is something that's, is quite prominent and happening quite a bit. And as I always say, pilots need to be trained well. Private jet pilots fly less than airline pilots. I usually fly 250 to 300 hours a year, while the airline pilots are flying about 900 hours a year. And the other challenge that private jet pilots have, they're going into many more destinations, and very often they're going to a place they've never been to before. So this is why I say don't pay for your pilots to do the minimum required training. Make sure they do more simulator training. And if you are going into Aspen a lot, you're planning going into Aspen a lot, which is a tricky airport, you need to have them do some training specifically for Aspen Airport. So have your chief pilot design some training scenarios with different failures and whatever. Do the scenarios in the winter with winter operations. Do it in the summer with the challenges that you have with the summer operations, with the temperatures being higher in that, and that affecting runway performance and that. These are all things. Allow your pilots to have different apps which allows them to compute runway analysis stuff and that. There's a lot of these things out there. Boeing have come out with one recently. Let your pilots, buy these tools and use them and give them time to use them. But I would say the simulator training is really, really important. So if the simulator budget is $35,000 per pilot, double it so that they can do this extra training. It's really, really important. It will keep you safe. And I've said this over and over again, but the factors that play into, and I say this in the quantum economy, I talk about the safety record in private aviation being 9.2 times worse than the airlines. And so what I'm trying to do here is educate you out there that are looking to buy your own aircraft, is to understand that, the pilot part of it is just as important, if not more important, than the airplane itself. So the pilot, the type of pilot you hire, their experience and their training. It's like if you're buying a soccer team and you're going to buy the best player in the world, you want to make sure that that best player stays the best player by training more effectively. And it's not so much the hours of training, it's what they're actually doing in the training. So, my pilots did an extra 10 hours of simulator training this year. Okay, but what did they actually do in the simulator? The other thing which I advocate is upset recovery training, and that's not only to be done in the simulator but on aircraft. There are a number of companies out there that offer this service. That's another thing I'd send your pilots to do once a year. And obviously this is going to increase your budget for training, but it's going to keep you safe. And at the end of the day, the number one reason why people buy a private jet or use a private jet is to save time. Well, you want to save time, but you also want to be safe, and you don't want to kill yourself. So it's important to understand this. These are airplanes, they go up into the sky. They're flying in 4 dimensions, as I call it, because time is an important factor beside the X, Y, Z. So these are important things. So let's get the conversation going here below in the comment section. What do you think of these runway excursions and that? Are you thinking of buying an aeroplane? You can reach out to me. We can do a one-to-one call, and I can help you and guide you into which is the best airplane, and not only in finding the right airplane, but also hiring the right pilots and designing a training program for them to keep you, your family, your business associates and that safe. So that's all here from Fabrizio Poli on this episode of Biz Jet TV. Grab yourself a copy of The Quantum Economy, clicking on the link below, and check out this other video we did recently about flying into Aspen, which I'm sure you're going to enjoy. And that's all from Fabrizio Poli on Biz Jet TV, and I'll see you on the next one.